I've started this live stream because I wanted to share with the DotVVM community how to download the source code of DotVVM and how to do some tiny changes or updates or implementing new features in the framework codebase itself. So I will be explaining how DotVVM works and what's the project structure in the GitHub repo. And of course, you are welcome to ask any questions in the chat. And also, we will be very happy if you send us any pull requests. And I've decided that I will implement two smaller features in the DotVVM framework. So maybe let's start with the explanation of what I will try to do today. I have not prepared anything, so it might be quite crazy because I will be looking how some things work. But the first issue should be quite easy to solve. Last couple of weeks we have been doing live streams with my friend, with Michal Valášek, and we were rewriting his Ask Me sample application. It's on GitHub, writers say cz/askme, and we were rewriting this app in .vvm, and we found that we have a login page, and when you enter the information in the login dialog, we need to redirect the user to the return URL, which can be in a query string parameter. So we will read this query string parameter and redirect the user. But we are not checking if this URL is local or if it's absolute, and it might be a security issue, because if somebody creates a URL for the login page which looks like that, it can be dangerous. Yeah, because basically you will display the login page, the user will enter his correct username and password and click login. And the application reads this parameter, which is this URL, and there's a typo here. So this is another domain, it's an attacker's domain, but he can create a login page which looks exactly the same as the original, as your own login page. And what happens if you enter username and password into some login form and you click login and nothing happens? So what will you do? Naturally, you will enter the same information in the username and password box and try it again, because you might done a typo, you never know. But you are on the attacker's domain and his login page looks exactly the same as yours. So you are giving the attacker your information. So when you are doing these kind of redirects from the login page, you should always make sure that you are on the local URL, that this URL is only in your application. It's a relative URL. It cannot be absolute URL. Yeah, so that's the issue. And .vvm, it's not a security bug in .vvm, because it's your responsibility to make sure that this URL is local. You need to know that. But .vvm doesn't help you, because there is no method called something like local redirect to URL, which would make sure and help you with checking this thing. And there is a method, local redirect, which is present in MVC. So I will look how MVC deals with this situation, and I will create a helper method, something like redirect local or redirect to local URL, and make sure that this function is available for you to use. And if you have implemented some applications in .vvm and you have this issue in the application, you should fix it using the new method I will implement. And there's another issue I have created and picked. One of the issues here, it's about route constraints. We were using route parameters, and I needed this thing. So there is the parameter in the URL, and here is one route constraint, and here is another route constraint, and this is currently not supported in .vvm. We support only one route constraint, but this could be quite a limitation. So I would like to try supporting multiple route constraints, And also in ASP.NET Core, there is an option to specify default value just here in the route parameter. So maybe I will be able to implement that too. I don't know if I fit in the time I have reserved for this stream, but we will see. So if you want to help us with development of .vvm, you can fork our repo. Yeah, so github.com/reganti/.vvm, and you can click on fork, and this will create your own fork under your username. You can create any change you want and send us a pull request. It's a good approach to create a branch first for every feature that you are trying to implement. Yeah, so that's what probably I should start with too. So I've already downloaded the source code of .vvm. I've cloned this repo, and I will make sure that I will create a branch. Okay, so I need to open the Team Explorer, which is here. Yes, so here is the list of my branches, and I'm in the original repo. You will be in the fork, but it should look the same because it's just a clone of the repo. So first I will create a branch, and I will create a branch called feature / for example local redirect, and I will check out to this new branch. So this will switch to the new branch I have just created, and it's exact copy of the master. So now I'm in my own branch and I can start working. So what I need to do is, I can repeat that, is to implement the redirect to local URL, which will do the same thing, but it will throw an exception if this URL is not local. Yeah, so the attacker will not be able to create a URL like that because he would get an exception, which is what I want to implement. Okay, so let's see how MVC checks whether the URL is local or not. Yeah, so I will open the code base of MVC, ASP.NET Core MVC. And it should be this repo, ASP.NET/ASP.NET Core. And there's a nice feature if you are on GitHub, and if you press T, it will open a file browser, so you can just write a part of the file name, and it will search for the files in the entire repo. So this is very nice. And there is something like local redirect result. It may be that, so I will open that in a new tab. Also, there should be controller base or something like that, which will probably contain the local redirect method or something like that. So let's try that first. Okay, so this is the controller base in MVC, and I will search for local redirect, and it looks like it's that. Yeah, so this is just checking if the local URL is empty. If it's empty, there is an argument exception. That's not what I want, so let's look in the local redirect result. Okay, so this should make sure that the URL is local. Yeah, so here is execute result async, which processes this result, and there is a required service of iAction result executor local redirect result. So there is also some executor for this kind of result. So let's try that. It must be somewhere in the code base. Oh, local redirect result executor. So this gets the local redirect result and makes sure that the URL, okay, I'm getting some URL helper, and I'm making sure if it's local URL. If it's not, I'm throwing invalid operation exception. Okay, so we might use the same exception, so it's there. And so I need to find its local URL. So let's search for is local URL, and local redirect result executor, URL helper, extensions, IURL helper. So that should be somewhere. URL helper base, and there it seems like this is the implementation of the is local URL. And obviously they have some crazy algorithm to make sure that this URL is local. Okay, so it must, or it should start with slash, but not with 2 slashes. Yeah, because if you start with 2 slashes, it will, I can do, for example, this. So this could be an absolute URL, because if I'm on HTTP, it will prepend HTTP here. If I'm in HTTPS, it will do the HTTPS, but this is absolute URL. I don't want it. I only need the local ones, which can start with slash or with this one. Or it shouldn't start with slash at all. Yeah, so it should start with slash or should start with this and slash, but just one. Yeah. Okay, so I think that we should borrow this method, because it's otherwise this is in some ASP.NET MVC package, and DotVVM shouldn't be dependent on MVC. So I will just use this method. And we can do that. Yeah, so this is the way how to check if the URL is local or not. Maybe it's not the best way, but Microsoft has some reasons why they are using it. So now I should look for the method, and I don't know why my shortcut isn't working. So go to all, redirect to URL. Okay, and this is located in a class which is called .vvm request context extensions. Yeah, so I have the redirect to URL, and there should be multiple versions of this thing. Yeah, redirect to URL and redirect to URL permanent. Yeah, so I can just create a method which will do the additional check for that. Yeah, so basically I can copy that. Verifies that the URL is local and returns the redirect response and interrupts the request execution. So redirect to local URL, and now I need to the translate virtual path. It will add the tilde and slash symbol if it's not there. And if you are running in a virtual directory, so your application is running on your app.com/something/, and this is the root URL of your application, so it will also add the prefix. So maybe this is the thing that we can use, but the method from the MVC, it also supports the format of the URL with the tilde, so maybe we don't need to do anything like that. So I just create something like URL helper, so we are consistent with MVC. So let's do that. I have a utils class, and we don't have any URL helper, so I can add URL helper. So let's use that. Okay, so we have the public bool is local URL. Maybe we can make it static, because right now we won't need more implementations. And I will add a new description for that. Checks whether the URL is local. Okay, so I can call if not URL helper is local. Oh, I have some URL helper class. Okay. Okay, so this changes the situation. I will just take this and add it to an existing URL helper. That's great when the naming is consistent. So you name a class and then you find out that you actually have a class of that name. Okay, so we have is local URL right here. So URL helper is local URL. If it's not, we will throw new invalid operation exception and do some error message. The URL is not local. And or of course there is a constant struggle if the URL should be listed here or not, because that's why I, for example, hate the int.parse method, because you give it some string and you try to parse it a number, but the error message doesn't contain that string. Yeah, so it's difficult to track down. So I think that here it's quite safe to just pass the URL in the error message. It shouldn't do anything, it shouldn't cause any problems. Yeah, so we have the redirect to local URL, and that's it. And also there is redirect to URL permanent. I'm not sure if we need permanent redirects for local URLs. I cannot imagine a use case for that, so maybe we can just skip that, because why would you do permanent redirects and limit them to local URLs? If somebody would need this method, we will be happy if he or she sends us a pull request. I can keep it that way. Okay. Now let's see if we have some tests for redirect to URL. Because if we have, it would be quite easy to add also a test for this new function I have just created. So we have some tests for redirects, but I'm not sure. This is the UI test which will launch the browser, so I'm not sure if this is a good way to test this, because I'm just throwing an exception, so which can be tested in the UI tests, but it's not so easy. Okay, it seems like there are no tests for the redirect method, so I can just believe that this is working, or I can just create the tests for just this function and double check that this is correct. So if it's not local URL, if this returns false, I'm throwing the exception. Yeah, this might work. Okay. So let's dig into tests. There is a lot of solution folders in the .vvm repository in the solution file. So we have a folder with tests, and .vvm contains a lot of test projects. We have some performance tests. We have tests for REST API bindings. Basically, this is APIs. This tests the extensions for Swashbuckle library, which creates the Swagger metadata. And we also have the tests of the entire framework. There are some special tests for ASP.NET Core, for OWIN, and for JavaScript. But most of the tests are in the common project, because they are same on the OWIN and ASP.NET Core. And also there are .vvm samples tests, which are the UI tests. We have some sample .vvm applications which we can run for every commit in the .vvm repo, and these sample tests, they are running these UI tests which are written in Selenium. So this is the classical unit and integration tests project. So I think that we can create a test for that. URL helper tests, and I'm not sure if we are using XUnit or MS-test. Oh, we are using MS-test. So let's stick to that. So we need the test class attribute. for the test class itself. Then we need the test method. There should be a code snippet for that, so we can just say test m and press tab, and it should generate the test method. And I think that URL helper is local URL, and we may, so we can check if this is correct. So I need to find the URL helper is local URL, and I will is this MS test 1 or oh, this is MS test 2. That's great, because I can use the data tests, which basically means that this I can pass parameters to test methods, so string URL and bool is local. So I will pass some test data, so some URL, and if it's local or not. So I can create local. This is also local, and this is not local. This is also not local, and if it will be HTTPS some Google.com, it's also not local. Yeah, so this must be a local URL. I think that if it starts with anything else than just slash or the tilde, or if it starts with 2 slashes or this, it won't be local. And if it starts with anything else, it also won't be local, because I believe that there is the return false at the end of this method. Yeah, so anything else which doesn't start with this or this will be treated as non-local. Yeah, so now I can just pass the URL and create a result and assert are equal, and I think that is local should equal to the result. And I can rename this, because it's not a good name. I can rename this to expected result. Yeah, so I'm checking the expected result with the actual result, and they should be the same. Okay, now it just hangs. I don't know why. Okay. Sometimes you just need to wait, and we can run this. I hope that my favorite shortcut, Ctrl-RT, like run tests, it will work. So let's see. Okay. Okay, it looks like no tests are green. So what happened? I'm in .vvm framework tests common. Okay, so this is this tests. I'm in routing. .vvm route tests. Oh! .vvm route tests. This was executed, but the other, this wasn't executed. It's strange. It's data test method. I can try it once again, maybe. Oh, there is some warning. A test settings file is not supported with the MS Test v2 adapter. Okay. What does this mean? I will just turn off the test settings file. I'm not sure why it's there. So let's try that. Oh, now it's here. So it's some strange behavior of the with this. Okay, so it seems like the test is passing. Yeah, and you can see all the test runs for every data row I have passed to this test. So we have a function, we have the tests, and now I need to double check if this exclamation mark is correct, because I don't want to push this in the framework unless I'm absolutely sure that this is correct. Yeah, so I believe that it's correct. If this returns false, I will be throwing an exception. Otherwise, I'm doing the exactly same thing I would do here, and maybe it's not good idea to have these two lines copy pasted, so I can just call the original implementation, which is redirect to URL, and I need to call it on the context. Yeah, okay, so let's create more room. Okay, so this is that, and also I should copy these two parameters, so replace in history and allows SPA redirect, which should be persisted and passed to the original method. Okay, now I am quite satisfied with the implementation, so I can commit and push these changes and create a pull request. I'm just building it to be sure that I haven't broken anything. Okay, so now let's create a commit. I switch to this Team Explorer and changes and edit redirect to local URL. Okay, so I can commit and push. Okay, so now this new branch should be on our GitHub, and if you list the branches, oh, it's there. So I can, and if you fork this repo, you will see the similar screen, which can just find the branch, and you can create a pull request to our original repository. So the process is the same. The only exception is that you will have your own GitHub username here, but otherwise it's the same. And you can create a new pull request. So edit redirect to local URL, and the implementation of is local URL is copied from ASP.NET Core MVC. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. And we can just create pull requests. So and because we have this connected, we have connected our repository to VSTS, or today the name is Azure DevOps. So we can run our tests on the every pull request we get. So I can open our VSTS to show you how this looks like. So I have the .vvm, and if I look in the Azure pipelines, we can see that there is a new build, and it is run, it's executed on the feature local redirect branch. Yeah, so there is a new branch, there is a new commit, and I'm making sure that the tests will be executed before this is merged. Yeah, and the test results will be synchronized here. So after the tests are finished, and if everything will be okay, this will be green. Otherwise, I will see which tests have failed. Yeah, so you can set up a connection between GitHub and the Azure DevOps. And if you're curious how to do that, I believe it's here in the Options tab, or sorry, on the Triggers tab, because we have a continuous integration here, and we have yeah, that's it. Maybe yeah, maybe that's just it. Yeah, because we are running it on all branches except of these two. So, and the pull request is basically a new branch. So that's how it works. Okay. Yeah. So that should be the first step. First pull request. I'm curious how the builds will run. I see that all of them crash because we have some alt tests which are not updated. Yeah, so I guess also this will not end up correctly. But we'll see. Oh, this configuration for ASP.NET Core, it has configuration for because you can see this is on the branch and this is on the pull request. Yeah, so we have it configured here. And here are the triggers, and yeah, maybe it's here. Yeah, now I found the window. It's here. It's no, it's also not that. Okay, no, never mind. I'm not sure where exactly you can configure this for the pull requests, but I think that there was some window where you could. Oh, this pull request validation, that's it. Yeah, enable pull request validation. This is the window I've been looking for. And we can also build some pull requests for forks of this repository. So if you fork your our repo and create a pull request, we will also run tests for that. It has some security considerations, but we are, since this is the framework, there are no passwords, no connection string, not basically anything, so there shouldn't be many things that you could evil things that you could do, but please don't try. We are a community project, and we don't want to spend much time for by dealing with some kind of trouble. Yeah, but yeah, right now we are running the tests also on the pull requests, so please be nice to us. Okay. So that's how this can be configured, and so while we are waiting for that, it can take about 15-20 minutes because there's a lot of UI tests which need to be run. So I can start with the other task, which are the route constraints. I think that this will be more difficult to do, but basically when you register your routes. And I could also show this in the Ask Me application, because it's quite nice to do. Yeah, so this is the .vvm application. There is .vvm startup, and we have some routes here. Yeah, and basically you can register a route like that. So you pass the name of the route and this URL pattern, and you can use the name of the parameter. You can use exclamation mark, the question mark to indicate that this parameter is optional. And also you could use colon and specify the route constraints. We are not using them there because we've hit the issue where you cannot chain multiple of them. But theoretically you should be able to use the route constraint here, so you can say just colon int, and it would make sure that this parameter is integer. And what we were trying to do and weren't successful was this. So the parameter name was page number, and it should be integer, and the minimum value needed to be 1. Yeah, so that's one of the things I would like to address here. So I need to dig in the code and see how I can do it. First, I should also create a new branch. So I can close all these windows and I can create a new branch. So let's see, new local branch from master, and it will be feature route constraints or multiple route constraints. Okay, so create branch and I will check it out. Okay, so now it's active. And let's see, we have tests. I was in the tests project, so we can start with the tests. We have tests for routes, for matching the routes, so it should be quite easy to do the testing because I have some tests which make sure that this actually works. Yeah. And also the test should help me to make sure that I haven't broken anything. Yeah. So maybe we can start with finding the tests and making sure that all tests for routing are actually successful. And these are not the UI tests, these are just integration tests. So it should not run any browsers or anything like that. Okay, so it looks greenish. Okay, we have 44 tests for the routing, and basically I'm interested only in the ismatch. The build URL is not important for us. And so let's see. There are also some tests for the multiple route constraints. Okay, so I can just, okay, here we have a test for route constraints. So we can just copy some test and make sure it will work. Okay, so I'm looking for some simple test to, this is build URL, I need the ismatch. Oh, maybe it will be easier to find here. One optional parameter with constraint. Okay, this can be a nice test to start. So I can create a new test, one optional suffix parameter with 2 constraints. And I can create the same pattern I wanted. So this is the min value of 1. And now I will try to run this test, and it should fail because we don't support multiple route constraints. So I should get an exception. So let's try this. Okay. Nothing happened. Oh yeah, yeah. Now it's there, the red thing. Okay, so as you can see, we got an exception that support for multiple route constraint is not implemented. Okay, so let's see why. To do. Okay, nice. Okay, so let's try that. The route URL is not, okay. So how this works? This is parse parameter function, and I guess that this is parsed by some regular expression. So I think that we have the parse route URL, which will get the URL, and we prepend this, and we will look for, okay, also we are parsing URL character by character in this for loop. And when we find this bracket, we will look for the closing bracket and append parameter parser result. Yeah, so this is the method which will. Okay, we are building some regex and okay. And now we have a regex for the route. And who is calling this? The parser. Yeah, and now we are calling. Yes, this is not correct because we have parse parameter and support for multiple route constraints is not implemented. So this is the place we should be. Okay, so route constraints. We will find the type. Okay. Okay, so this is the place we should hook in. So if the URL, if we find a colon, we will parse this until we find one of these characters. So we are reading the route parameter, the URL, and this is the index where the route constraint is stopping. So we will extract the name of the route constraint. If it's not registered, we will throw an exception. That's great. And there is something like type. What's type? Okay, here route parameter constraint. Okay, so this, I don't know why it's called type, because it shouldn't be that way. And we are just assigning that, and yeah, now we are using that. Okay, so I will rename that. And this is just constraint. And I'm afraid that we will need multiple constraints. So let's create a list of constraints. Maybe from the performance reasons, let's just make it null. So we will name this constraints. And if we are reading the first parameter, we can just create a new list, because if there is no, if there is nothing, we can just keep null there. If there is no constraints. Okay, so that's it. And there is constraints, and now parameter parser, if it's null, then we will. Oh, if it's not null, we need to process all the route constraints, not just one, but we should parse the first constraint. If it passes, then we should parse another one, and so on, so on. Yeah. So this might be this should, I think that this should be a method, because we will do more things in that. So let's create block body for lambda expressions, and yeah, we can extract a method from that. I don't know where I need to. Okay, so let's just create a function for that. Okay, so we are getting as like string, and we need to return the. We need to return parameter parse result. Okay, so private parameter parse result, parse constraints list of I route constraint, and string param value. Okay, and here we can just say return this, and I believe that we also need the parameter. So what's parameter? We will see parse constraints s and parameter, and what type is the parameter? Parameter is also string, so parameter, and maybe I should reorder these things. So change signature, and the value, parameter, value, and the constraints. Okay, this should be it. That's it. Okay, and now there can be multiple constraints, so I should go through all of them. Constraints count, and I should parse that. Okay, so I will parse that, and it will return some result. If result is okay, if it's not okay, I will return the result. If it's not okay, I will return it. And if it's okay, the value should be the parameter, the result value. And now we have a problem because this is object, because the int constraint, it takes string but returns integer. Yeah, so we need to extend this API, so we will be able not only to parse string but also to parse any other object type. Yeah, but parse string must be there for every case, but if it's a different type, we should add a method here that would allow this. And then we will return the last result, and that's why I need to declare this this function here, because we can safely return the result here, and I can call break here because that's it, and I'm returning a result. I can assign null, it's not a problem. Okay, we will get back to that. Oh, it's struct. Okay, so default. I will return back here because we need to support other types in this implementation. Because if the constraint says that if the first constraint is int, so I can parse the value to integer. I don't want to convert it back to string, or maybe I can just use this. No. It would be better to do the parsed and converted value for the specific type. Okay, so I will get back later, but here, so the only issue is here, the route constraint of parameter. Yeah, so I need to, okay. I will need the constraint which I'm working with right now here. So that's great. So I can use it in this error message. And also, when I found another route constraint, I should do the same thing here. So this basically shouldn't be if, this should be a while loop. So this, because if there's a colon, which means that we have at least one route parameter constraint, so I will search for the rest of that. Yeah, so if I was here on this position, so I have parsed this colon, so I will get this string, and then I will return back here, and that's why I am in the while loop, because there can be another parameter. Yeah, so I will just read this colon, then I will read that, and that's why I need a while loop, because then I can have another colon. Yeah, so that's it, and that's why this is wrong. So I will just add constraint, and I will init the list here. It will be easier. Okay, so that's it. So I will have a list of constraints, and that's it. I will create a constraint and add this. And then I'm parsing the parameters. If there is a parameter to the constraint, I will pass it to the constraint. Yeah, so that's the parameter of the constraint. And okay, that's also an issue, because I have multiple parameters. Every constraint can have another parameter. So I need to parse the parameter, and I will add the constraint right here. Okay, so string parameter equals null, and that's it. And now I need to add the constraint to the list of constraints, and I need the constraint and also the parameter of that constraint. So I can do something else. I can this is just the constraint, nothing like the parameter. So I can create a tuple, or I could create just some class. It could be easier, but I could create a tuple. Parameter is a string. Yeah, so I could create a list of these things. Okay. Sorry, the wrong syntax. Constraint and string parameter. Yeah, so this is a tuple. Yeah, and I could add basically this constraint parameter. I would take these two variables and pass it here. If you don't like tuples, it's okay. I also don't like them much. But if this would be only in this method, if I don't pass that away from this method, I will be okay. I would be okay with the constraint with the tuples. But since I need to pass that to another method, I can just convert this to struct, and this may be more complicated than I just need, but okay, let's do that. And I will name it constraint with parameter. Okay, and it's a struct, and there is it created a get hash code and equals implementation, which I will not be comparing those, so I think I don't need that. And also I don't need these deconstruction parameters, because this is quite simple. Yeah. So let's just have a struct. I can make it public because why not? There are other public structs. And I will just pass a list of constraint with parameters. And now I will have the parameter of the constraint. Yeah, so the constraint is that. And constraints I dot parameter. That's it. Okay. These are properties. Okay, so I can just refactor that to properties. It would be yeah. So it's the same as here. I want to be consistent. Okay, so this is that. So now I have a list of constraints with their parameters, and that's why I needed to change my implementation, the implementation of the route parsing. Okay, so and constraint equals constraint parameter equals parameter. Yeah, so now this method is parsing the URL string. Yeah, so for example articles slash and page number. Yeah, so this while loop, as I said, it if it finds a colon, it will parse the parameter. If there is a bracket with the value, it will yeah, so it parses the constraint name. If there is a bracket, it also parses the parameter, and I have a list of constraints which are part of the route. Yeah, so that's it, and it should work. And now I have these two errors here. First, now this list won't be null. It will never be null. Yeah, so we can just say something like that if constraints any. If there is any constraint, we can do that, and then I don't need the parameter here. First, I didn't understand that the parameter is the parameter of the constraint. It's not a global parameter, so that's it. And then if we have some constraint, we can use the regex of the constraint. Every constraint can give us a regular expression to be matched. Yeah, so we can include that in the regular expression of the entire route, and it will be faster. I would not need to call the implementation of the route constraint to be able to tell if the route is matched. Because there can be multiple constraints, I can just take the regex of the first constraint. So if it's there, I can first or default. But since this is struct, it won't work, so I will do just if constraints any. I can say constraint first, constraint get part regex, and it needs my parameter of the constraint, so I will just say constraints first parameter, and if it's not there, I will use this, and maybe this can also return null. Let's see on the references. Okay, this, let's see the references. If there is something that could return null, okay, it looks like not. Part regex. I'm not sure, but this could also return null. So what I think would be safer to convert this to if statement. So I can try control dot. Okay, no. Okay, so string pattern if constraints any. I can assign the pattern to this, and then I can say pattern equals pattern, and if it's null, we will use this value. I think that this should be safe. Yeah, so if the constraint cannot provide us with the regular expression that can match that, we will, and it can return null, we will just use this default. And in all cases, even if the regex is matched or not, if the regex is matched, we still call the implementation of the route constraint. So the regex doesn't need to be accurate. If it says it's not matched, we won't test it further. But if it says that it's matched, we still test the route constraint if it's okay. Okay, so that's it. And now the last issue is this conversion. I'm not sure if I want to, because we have the parse string method right here, and this is an interface. So I could add a new method, parse object, or something like that, but it could be difficult to do because I would break the interface. So I'm thinking there are two options we have. First one is to use the feature of C#8, which is default interface implementation, but I think that we don't use this feature in .vvm on any other place, so I'm not sure if this could introduce a new dependencies on some NuGet packages or language version in the .vvm, so I would need to discuss that with the entire team. But we can do that without that. I think that we can create a new interface. Something like I typed route parameter constraint, and this can inherit from the original interface, and I can use the parameter parse object. Yeah, and the route constraints that will support different types than string, this method could be called on them, and if this is not implemented in the route constraint, I will just use the parse string. I will just call toString on the value, or I will use the original value which I get in the URL. Yeah. So if we can work with the converted route parameter constraint, that would be fine. Or I can use converted. It can be better. So if okay, so I can say parse converted. It seems better to me. Okay, so if I'm here, and if the next constraint, or I can do that. I have the original value. I can rename that to original value. And object converted value, or last result. No, converted value will be better. So I will assign this converted value, and now I will check if my constraint is I converted route parameter constraint. I can use, constraint is this. I can use the typed version of this method, converted value, and here I need to pass original value. Yeah, so I will pass the converted value, and I will I need to converted value constraint, and this will be that. Okay, so parse converted, and I will keep using the converted value, but if the route constraint doesn't support that, I will just use the original value. Now I'm not sure if I should use the this might be a little bit tricky, because but the route constraint shouldn't change the value. They only should convert it to a more specific type, not from string to integer or something like that, parsed value, but the value should remain the same. I cannot imagine the route constraint that would be mutable, that would change actually the value. So this should be okay, because all the constraints should work with the value that was provided in URL. Basically, this is mandatory and this is optional. And we can have some assumptions that if this value is parsed, okay, we will behave in some way, but this should be that. And because I have created a new interface, I don't need to break this one, so I won't break anyone's code. Yeah, if you implemented your own route constraint, you will be safe. And I'm still thinking maybe I will do parse object here. I'm not sure. Maybe we can change the naming later. Okay, so now my code is compilable. It should compile, but I don't have any implementation of this, so basically this won't be the exact thing I really need, but no problem. It can be but now the test should work. Yeah, and the build succeeded, and now I should be able to work with multiple route constraints. Yeah, so now this shouldn't end with exception. I'm not sure if the function will be correct entirely, yeah, because we have isMatch, so I'm not sure if this will work, but we shouldn't get the exception. Yeah, so let's try that. Okay, it looks like it works. And because this is optional, the route constraints are not executed, I will get the default value. Okay, so now it's not testing everything I have written, but at least it works. So what I will try the required parameter. I don't know if we have some function with required parameter and a constraint. I don't think so. We don't have many methods with the constraints. Okay, so this is with constraint, with two constraints, and this is building URL. Okay, so we don't have the constraints covered much, so that's definitely a thing I want to improve. Okay, so we have one optional parameter with constraint and with two constraints. That's great. So let's use this with the required parameter. Yeah. So let's add constraint with constraint, and it should be integer. Yeah. So that's the integer, and it should return true. And we should be able to get the parameters. So assert are equal, and we expect an integer value of 15 to be present in the collection. So parameters ID should return integer 15, not string 15. Yeah, because we are converting the value. Okay, so let's try that. And I will run it with the debugger, so I will see if I will see the actual results. Okay, so this is 15, And yeah, no, there are no double quotes, so it should be integer. Okay. Yeah, so the test is working. So this is one constraint. This is just adding a test for the previous behavior. Now I can use min1 with 2 constraints. And when I try 15, it should be more than 1. So maybe, and this I expect some trouble here, because the constraint for minimum values, it supports only the only this. Oh, maybe it will work, because the route constraint inside it converts the value to double. So maybe we will be successful. But let's see. So I can run this, and we will see why I have used the number 2, because if the comparison is in alphabetical order, this shouldn't work. But I can just it seems, oh no, we have failed. We have 2 constraints. Okay, sorry, we expected 15 and actual is double. Okay, yeah, so now I need to, because it should be integer, yeah, this should convert the string 15 to integer 15, and this shouldn't, it should also return the same number, so we shouldn't get double, we should get integer. I've looked how the route constraints work, the default constraints. They can be found in .vvm configuration. And we have some default constraints here, somewhere. Okay, here. And I've looked at this implementation, and basically the min and max constraint, they convert the value to double. And then check the boundaries. It's great for strings, because if I skip this int constraint, it will work, because it will take string and it will convert it to double, and it will work. But if the previous constraint is not integer, it could be a little bit problematic. So what I want to do, this is a generic route parameter type, which is a special type of route constraint of the route constraint, and I can add an implementation of the converted, because the original implementation, it works only with the strings. So I will add also the parse object. Yes, so we have, okay. And we can, if value is string, then it's very easy, because we can redirect the call to parse string, and it will be easy to do. But yeah, I can do that. And if it's another type, I would need this. I would need this other parameter. I will get, and I don't know which one is which. The first is value, the second is parameter. Okay, so the first here should be object, and converted parser, and this is optional. So if I don't pass that, nothing happens. It will still work, so I'm not breaking the code. And here I need to, this converted parser equals converted parser. Okay, so we have another function here, Okay, let's get rid of the private so I'm consistent with the previous line. And now if converted parser is set, I can just run it. Yeah, so return converted parser, and I will pass the value and the parameter. And if the converted parser is not here, I can throw new not supported exception. The route constraint doesn't support the value of and also if it's null, which can be, I will redirect it to the parse string, yeah, because this should be already handled, yeah. And I will add dollar here, so this won't be null, so we will always get the type. The problem is that I won't know the name of the constraint which I'm trying to resolve, so this might be a little bit confusing, and I think that we should add name of the constraint here, so I could provide it in the error message, but let's do it later. To do add route constraint name, because otherwise I wouldn't know which of the route constraints actually failed. Okay, but now it should handle the converted parser, and if this is chained in a chain of route constraints, and the first will convert and the second wouldn't support that. Oh, maybe I'm thinking about splitting this into a different class, because this interface would be implemented always. I may need this only for a particular route constraints. Okay, one slight change. I'm sorry for so many changes, but I will also create generic converted route parameter type. It will derive from the generic route parameter type and implement the iConverted route parameter constraint. Okay, this would be more clever to do, as I don't want to implement this all the time for all constraints, even those who do not support that. Yeah, so let's move this here, and this should be renamed. I should need to call base regex and parser. Okay, so we have the base call right here. This gets rid of that, and we have two classes, one for just the generic, for the string route constraints, and one for the converted values. Okay, so this should be better. And I'm back in the DotVVM configuration, and here the min and max and also the range, they support other than string types. So it should be generic converted route parameter type, and we should provide an alternate implementation for that, and that should be here. So it will be value object and parameter, Okay, so this is the alternate implementation, and what's wrong with that? Oh, I'm not returning a value. Okay, so I can parse the parameter. Okay, and this value object should be integer, some numeric type. I have a class called reflection utils, and it's numeric type. Yeah, so if it's null, this won't be called because I have added condition. So if it's not a numeric type, I will throw new not supported exception. The max route constraint only supports numeric types. Okay, so that's the first check. And now I can I'm not sure how to approach that because I don't know the exact type of the number. There are a dozen of numeric types in .NET, and I need to compare that with the parameter. So maybe there is something in the reflection utils. There's convert value, object value to type. Yeah, so maybe I would be able to convert the string to the same type as my value object. Okay, yeah, that could be the way. So I can take the parameter and convert it to the same object as the value type equals value object get type. So I don't need to call that multiple times. So if first I will get the type of the value. If it's not a numeric type, I will throw an exception. And now I take the parameter, which is string, and I will convert it to the correct type. And the correct type is the same type as the value. Yeah, so that should be that. And parameter value. And all numeric types should be icomparable. Or I hope that they should be icomparable. Let's try that. It's icomparable. So I can use the compare to method. And that should be what I need to do. So return the value object, which should be icomparable. And otherwise it wouldn't pass this check, so it should be that. And I will compare to the parameter value. It should also be icomparable, so that should work, and it should be the same type. Yeah, so those types should be okay. And if the first is greater than the second, it means that it's greater. So if this is greater than 0, it means the first is greater than this one. And since this is the max value, so this one should be less or equal. So this should be less or equal 0, because compare to returns integer, indicating whether it's okay or not. And yeah, if the condition should look differently. So if this is not, yeah, so if if the condition is not met, we will return failed. Okay, and otherwise we will return the parameter parse result, create. Oh, I have some weird issue here. Oh yeah, missing bracket. Oh no. Ah, that should be that. Okay, now it looks correct. Parameter parse result, create, and I will keep the same value as I get at the beginning. Okay. Okay, so now I really don't like this code because basically that's not what I would expect. So this is this should be for some kind of refactoring, but let's keep it that way right now. So first we will prototype some solution and then I will refactor it, and maybe we should create a class, something like numeric route parameter type or something like that, and it should cover all those three ranges, but let's see, we will see. Okay, and this will be the same thing. So this is the main value, so let's do the same thing here, and the only difference will be this name in the error message, and it should be that. So if this value is less than the minimum value, we will return failure, otherwise we will keep the value like it is. And the same thing will apply here. So let's borrow this, put it here, and then we have the range route constraint, only support numeric types. And this is a little bit more complicated because we have two conditions. So we will split the parameter value, and we will check the parameter value. Min parameter value will be the first part, and also we should check that there are exactly two parts. There should be minimum and maximum value. We are not checking it right here. Yes, so this is the min parameter value and this is the max parameter value. So if this or this, it's greater than 0 and this is max parameter value, then we will return the failure. And also if split, and there could be a lot of problems because we are also not checking the format of that. Here we have double parse, so I don't like this. It's not very bulletproof. There will be some problems. So we should refactor it. Now I just need to make sure that it works, so I will return back to the tests, but I promise that I will refactor this later. Okay, so now we have the route constraint parameter should be 15, and also this check should succeed. Okay, so let's try that. Maybe I fixed that. So it's correct. Okay, maybe I can create a new file from that. So we don't have two classes in one file. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, it's running. Oh, it's terrific. Okay, now let's see if when I place 20 here, it should second constraint not met or failed. And so if we have 20 here, assert is false. Yeah, so that should be that, and the parameters, I'm not sure if this will be correct, if we will have this value, but let's see, maybe it will be there. I will see, because if it fails, maybe this collection is not filled with the data. Okay, it looks like Yeah, key is not present in the dictionary, so we don't have the value if the constraint fails. Okay, no problem. We can live with that. Okay, so now this constraint works, and I feel that I should add a lot of other tests to make sure that the other constraints and the other combinations of constraints that work. But it would be too boring, so I won't do that on the file stream. Sorry, on the live stream. Okay, so let's commit that. Okay, and I will implement one other thing, or I will at least look how that could be implemented. So multiple route constraints supported. Added support for multiple route constraints, including converted values. Okay. Oh, I cannot sync because the branch is not published yet. Okay, so that's it. Now I'm just pushing. I cannot pull because the branch is only local and it wasn't on the GitHub. So the first you need to do push, then you can do sync or just pull. Okay. And there was also another requirement in the issue from our stream with Altair, that we can also support this, the default value. Yeah. There is actually another option to support default values like this in the additional parameter, but specifying the default values here can also be quite convenient. So let's see if we could add that. I may not, because the stream is getting too long, so I don't think I will implement this today, but it could be quite easy, and if you want to help us, you can certainly try to implement that, because it shouldn't be so difficult to do. Yeah, basically, when we read all the route constraints, when this while cycle ends, we also should add a section here that could give us the default value. Yeah. And that could be provided right here. So in the URL parameter parse result, we can also remember the default value, which was from the route. And I'm not sure if the route URL or the URL from the default values parameter should have priority. It would be great to make this work the same way as in MVC. So I should try that, but we could certainly implement that, and it shouldn't be so difficult to do. Yeah. So basically, the parsing of the route parameter of the default value should go here after this while loop, and we just need to remember the default value and pass it out from this method in this URL parameter parse result. And here somewhere where we are using that, so parse parameter, yeah, so this function is called on this place, and append parameter parse result. I'm not sure where this function is. Oh yeah, that's here. That's just here. Okay, so I can just remember this values and URL parser result. Yeah, so there should be the default values maybe for the parameters, and then I can combine them with the values I will get from the default values. Oh yeah, it's there. Yeah. So now I just need to decide if these given default values have priority over the default values from the route, and if not, and that's and here I can handle that. So yeah, so it shouldn't be so difficult to do. Okay, okay. Where I'm using the default values here. Oh yeah, here in the parse parameter. Oh, I have the default values here. Yeah, so it's even more easy because I didn't need to return that from my method. Okay, it's optional. Yeah, it's here. Okay, so now I'm just checking if the parameter is default or not. I'm not sure what would happen. I can just add the parameter default value in this collection, maybe, if it's there. Yeah, it could work. Okay, so I can try that now. It shouldn't be so difficult. And I need to where I'm calling index of any, I also need to check the equal sign, because if I hit the equal sign, there should be some special behavior for that. Yeah, so index of any is here and it's here, so I can do that. Oh, I don't like this to array. It's kind of slow, so we may think of something we can do. Okay, here's also this bracket. Okay. Yeah, this would be better than calling the to array. Maybe the compiler is smart enough to optimize that, but I'm not really sure about that. So let's help the compiler. And yeah, that's the other index of any. Okay. Okay, so if URL index equals, then it's the read the default value, and index should be the URL index of any, this one, but only we can, oh, we should only allow this. Okay, that's easier because I can just say index of and this string. Okay, so it's easier. Okay, so now I will I need to remember, okay, start index is that, and equals URL substring, and take this. Yeah, because this is the parsing. I have the start index and the index which is at the end of the string, so I can just take the substring between those two, and I need to subtract this because this is not the end position, this is the land. Okay, so I have now the default value, and if I can decide what should have the priority. If the priority is what's inside of this collection, yeah, I will get from the outside, then I will keep the parameter there, and if the priority is what's in the URL, I can just override that, or I can throw an exception that you have to choose. Yeah, that may be more clever. Yeah, because it's a conflict. And okay, so let's try that. If default values already contains and I hope yeah, name should be the name of the route parameter. Okay, so if it's there, throw new argument exception, the route parameter name specifies the default value in both route URL and default values collection. Okay, yeah, so there's a redundancy, so we don't need that. Okay, so we have an exception, and if it's not there, we can add it. Okay, default values name equals default value. Okay, that's great. I'm not sure about the conversions because the default value may not be run through the route constraints. So if you use the integer value, it would be the integer. I'm not entirely sure about how MVC works in this case, but let's just try that, and I will create then a sample application and we'll try all these combinations to make sure that this will work in the same way than as the ASP.NET Core MVC. Okay, for now I'm satisfied. Okay, and now let's add the dot here, and we can create a test for that also. So where I have been here, no, DotVVM route tests. Okay, so isMatch. Okay, so this is the last test for isMatch. So I will 2 parameters default value in route, so article / id equals 1 or abc, and also there's another problem. I have just right now I have found that we are setting is optional if there is a default value, so I need to set also is optional here. Is optional equals true. That will work, because if there is a default value, the parameter is optional too. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I have now article, and it should have 1 parameter, and assert are equal abc parameters id. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, it's green. Great. I hope it's yeah, default value in route. I don't know why it's not displayed here, but never mind. Okay, and default value used, other value used, or sorry, explicit value used. Okay, so now I will use explicit value, and it should be 15. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, it's yeah, I've renamed that so they don't have results for that, but this was also green, so it should work. The default should work. Great. Okay, I will add more tests for that because we don't have enough of them for the route constraints. Oh, a combination with route constraints. That should also be interesting. ID as int, and also the default value should be 15. And then I think that I need to know the output type of the constraint. Yeah, so maybe we should do another refactoring with constraint default value used. Okay, article, it's no, just that. And now it's string. I think that it will be string because the default values don't go through the route constraints, I hope. Yeah, maybe that's a problem because I think that we should, in this case, we should go through the route constraints. But the problem is that maybe the default value wouldn't pass the constraints. I'm not sure. I need to check out how MVC behaves in that case. To do, make sure MVC does the same thing. Should this be an int? Okay, great. But it passes, which means the parsing of the parameters seems to be correct. Okay. So I also commit this. Default values in route URLs. Supported. Okay. Commit and push. And let's see. Okay, so I have done a couple of things. One of the thing is the edit redirect to local URL. We can see the tests, some tests failed, so I need to make sure that the tests, that there are some broken tests. I don't believe it's my code which broke that because it was already broken, but we can look which tests were affected, which tests caused the problems, but it should be some UI tests. Okay, 3 UI tests, and yeah, it's all in .vvm samples test, so that's the UI test in Chrome. We have some issues with some of the UI tests, so all the unit and integration tests in the framework are passing. These are just UI tests which are not 100% reliable. Okay, so that's the pull request, and I can create another pull request. Maybe not now, because I need to make sure that it behaves the same way as in MVC, so I will do that later. Okay, so if you have any ideas, any feedback, just let us know. And if you'd like to cooperate with us on .vvm and send us some pull requests, we will be extra happy. So thank you, and see you sometime next week or the week after that, because I really like live streaming and coding on live streams, and I'm willing to continue with that. And if you have any tips or tricks or any ideas what I can show in the live streams, also let me know in the chat or on our Gitter room, gitter.im/riganti/.vvm. Join us in the conversation. I will be happy to chat with anyone. Okay, great, and see you next time. Goodbye.